The Baltimore Ravens 2 weeks ago were 0-2. The Chiefs lost. Everybody could excuse that. It's opening night at Arrowhead. The banner's going up. There's a lot going on. That's a tough spot for any team to go into as the road team. Then they lose in week two to the Raiders, and you got some arched eyebrows, and you got some people asking the question where the Ravens are at. And it was interesting because I had those same questions going back to May and June. And I was asking a lot of the same questions that a lot of you were after 2 weeks. And when I started to poke around a little bit more in May and June and try to figure out philosophically what the Ravens were doing, some of the stuff that came back was we're trusting in our program. We're trusting our ability to develop players, to develop coaches. And it may not look right at the very beginning, but it will look right eventually. So when people ask me about the Ravens start, I said, like, let's just hit the pause button and see where this goes. Let's let this develop for a little bit because this is one of these teams that feels like they're going to be there in the end, that has the flexibility to use the first month of the season as an extended preseason. And so where did the transition happen for this team? Well, I think if you look at it, you've got a completely new backfield. So you have Derrick Henry and Justice Hill back there playing in the spots that Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins had occupied over the last few years. You have three new starting offensive linemen, and this is where the draft and develop thing comes into focus. They lose Kevin Zeitler, John Simpson, and Morgan Moses. Three very experienced veteran linemen who've played a lot of football, especially Zeitler and Moses, both those guys in their 30s. Instead of going out and just buying replacements for those guys, they trusted in their pipeline. And so they had at guard Daniel Falele and Andrew Voorhees, they had drafted and developed. Falele in his third year, Voorhees in his second year coming through the program. And then at right tackle to replace Moses, they had Patrick McCarry, who's been there for a while, and they drafted Roger Rosengarten out of Washington. So they had four players they felt like this will eventually be enough. And in the beginning, it didn't look good, but eventually it's become enough. Same thing on defense. They lose Patrick Queen, a major piece, a big piece of who they've been, who they want to be over the last couple of years. Lights really come on for him. Had come on from him for him since Roquan Smith got there. And so they lose Queen, who was a real big playmaker for them last year. You talk to people they thought Trenton Simpson might wind up being an upgrade. He's a 2023 day two pick out of Clemson, but it was going to take a little bit of time. And then go to the edge position, right? So they lose Jadeveon Clowney. Well, we got to trust in what we have in the building. So can we get better play out of David Ajabo and Odafe Owe? And look, guys, at the beginning, it didn't look great, right? Like week one, week two, where are the Ravens at? What's going on? How are they going to make this work? And sure enough, here we are in week four. And I don't know that they're not the best team in football, the way that they were for the balance of the regular season last year. With the way Lamar's playing, with the way some of the other young players in their team have come along, Zay Flowers, Isaiah Likely, who, they raved about during training camp and said we're ready to take on bigger roles. And they jumped all over the Bills on Sunday night. And the Bills had been playing as well as anybody in football. In fact, I'd say 5, 6 days earlier, that was about as complete a performance as you're going to see from an NFL team, the way they beat down the Jaguars. And I know the Jaguars aren't very good right now, and there's definitely some turmoil there. But you don't generally see the sort of beatdown that we saw the Bills put on the Jaguars on Monday night. And they went into Baltimore, and that thing, I mean, Derrick Henry, 87 yards right off the top. That game was over quick. And the Ravens showed who they are. And I think so much of it is seeing guys coming through their program, like just how they've invested in developing people, players, coaches, just developing people. And there's another example of it from Sunday night, which was Zach Orr. And did Zach Orr have to have a high bar to reach for in replacing Mike Macdonald, who once replaced Wink Martindale? Well, sure. But if you go back and you look at Mike Macdonald in his second game as an NFL defensive coordinator, the Dolphins went for over 500 yards and scored 42 points. And there were a lot of people saying, well, did they do the right thing in going to Mike Macdonald and moving on from Wink Martindale? Well, that wound up looking pretty good in the long run, too. And here we are, lo and behold, Zach Orr's group didn't look great in week 2 of 2024 and losing to the Raiders, but now he's got his feet underneath him a little bit. They develop people in Baltimore. They develop Foyle. They develop Voorhees. They develop Makari. They develop Rosengarten. They develop Trenton Simpson. They develop Zach Orr. They develop people, and they put themselves now in a position to really start rolling. And Sunday night was a great example of the program, the strength of the program in Baltimore, and what John Harbaugh has built there over the last 17 years.